Hi, everybody. I'm John Clay, VP of Threat Intelligence here at Trend Micro, and welcome to my monthly threat webinar series. This is March 2022, and I'm going to be covering cloud mining activities. Before we get started, a couple of housekeeping items. First and foremost, this is being recorded, and we will publish the recording afterwards. So if you have any colleagues or friends that you'd like to invite to them, you can do so. We'll send you an email with that link, as well as a link to the slides that I'm going to be using today. Also, if you have a question, you can pop that into the Q&A or into the chat. And at the end of this session, I'll try to take as many of those as I can. If I don't get able to answer your question, I will try to follow up to you outside. Again, we're going to talk about cloud mining here, and that's an interesting topic that's been coming up more and more. Before I get started, though, as I always do in my in these webinars, I want to cover the month in review. So this comes from some information that we share, blogs that we share on our site, blog.trendmicro.com. And you can take a look at those on at any time. But I try to give you a highlight of kind of the top 5 that I think would be most interesting to you, my audience. First one is the FBI has released, IC3 has released their latest fraud scheme report. You can see here over 6.9 billion in losses last year by victims. It's an interesting report. I recommend that you download it and review it because, we see a lot of ransomware in the news, and everybody thinks ransomware is the biggest threat. But in their report, they actually show that it isn't the biggest threat that they had issues with, or that the victims that contacted them had issues with. And the majority of the money lost was not due to ransomware. So some good information for you to take a look at that report. Also wanted to highlight, we've been publishing a regular series called Ransomware Spotlight, and we've done a number of families already, from Conti to Lockbit to Clop. The latest one is Hive, and we're going to continue to publish these spotlights as the year goes on. Really, and they're pretty in-depth information. They got a nice infographic that gives you some good information about the TTPs that are being used by these groups. So the more you're aware of what, especially around the early warning information. So what are the tools and the malware that they're using prior to dropping their ransomware, so that you can get an early look if you see one of these items in your network and detect it, that it might clue you in that there might be a ransomware attack coming. We also published an article about the Russian Cyclops Blink botnet. This is a new botnet that we were seeing against ASUS routers. So good information if you have any ASUS routers that you utilize, whether at your workspace or at home, some good information about that. Fourth one I wanted to highlight, we've been working with the organization of the OAS, essentially, Organization of American States, which is a US-led program that's been run for years and years, many years, and it is a group from Latin America, South America, US, and Canada. And we did a report with them highlighting all the threats that we're seeing in those different countries and the different regions there. So if you're in any of those regions, might be a good one to take a look at. And then the last one, we published a couple of articles. This one is on the oil and gas cybersecurity for information about attacks targeting oil and gas. We just did one on energy. We'll be doing more of these as we talk more and more about the different types of attacks against critical infrastructure. We've got a pretty good threat intelligence being seen from these types of industries through our TX1 solution that we've been doing and we've been working with. So take a look at those. All right, so that's all I have so far. I wanted to highlight now the crypto mining attacks. So cloud mining. So there's a couple of different ways people talk about this: crypto mining, cryptocurrency mining, cloud mining, coin mining. There's a number of different ways that you could talk about it. The interesting thing, obviously, is cryptocurrency mining has been out there for quite some time, right? Since cryptocurrencies have actually been in existence. And there's a lot of people out there that are mining today. And to be successful in mining cryptocurrency, it really requires two things, right? First is your gains from crypto mining need to be greater than the cost of the resources. So you obviously have to invest in systems, in infrastructure, to be able to do the mining process itself. And you're seeing a lot of these places starting up and being done. We just heard that Chevron is investing in crypto mining as well. But also you have the cost of electricity, and that's an interesting one because there's been some news reports about, people, when you can see maps of how much electricity is being done. There's homes that show up with these massive amounts of red because they're doing a cryptocurrency mining inside that home, and there's multiple systems in there, and it costs. And so there is a cost to do crypto mining, and it can be pretty significant. And so as long as you can gain a profit, obviously you want to mine more than the cost of the resources and the cost of electricity. Now, what's interesting is why cybercriminals are successful at this is because they cheat. How do they cheat? Because again, their profits are pretty much insured because, one, they aren't funding the use of the resources. They're stealing the resources, systems, and infrastructure from their victims. So they don't have to pay out the amount of money to buy a system, buy GPU-based systems, whatever it might be. But also the victims end up paying the cost of the electricity because, again, they're stealing and utilizing these stolen systems. And so there's no cost there. So they're pretty much all profit for any coin that they mine or partial coins that they mine. That's all profit to them because they're cheating the system. So it makes sense on that they would do this, and we're seeing more and more of this type of activity. Obviously, we also see as cryptocurrencies grow in value, the more we're going to see mining happening because each coin gives more profit to both the owner of that, as well as if you're a cyber criminal and you're stealing the resources to mine those coins. So we look at the different types of coin mining that has been in existence out there. And you can see here, there's local coin miners where they'll just drop something, people will just install the mining applications on the system, in the systems themselves, the local systems, and then they do background mining by auto run. We have web coin miners where they'll mine when the website is open, so they compromise a web server, and when that website is open, they mine people. And again, these can be legitimate ways of doing it as well as illegitimate ways. Mobile coin mining, well, they'll look at mining in mobile phones. So they'll drop a miner on a mobile device and they'll mine from there. We also see a lot of IoT coin mining. And so where they're utilizing IoT devices to do the mining. Now, one of the things with all of these, what we find, and this is through a lot of the chatter we see in the underground communities, underground forums, because people are constantly asking, what are the best ways to mine? Well, the best ways to mine are to identify systems that are the best to use in coin mining. And one of the things we found out over the years is that mobile and IoT coin mining isn't very productive because it takes massive amounts of those systems because they just aren't designed to do the processing that is needed to do the coin mining. But one of the things we found recently is that cloud servers, cloud instances do have that capability. A lot of these are servers, So they're beefed up systems, or the instances can do a lot of things. And so, but one of the things that we also see is that GPU-based mining is the preferred method by legitimate actors out there. So legitimate people that are doing coin mining tend to invest in GPU-based systems, high GPU, because those are the best kind to do coin mining processing. But and we see a few of these out there from in the illegitimate space, but more often than not, and almost in most cases, it's CPU-based mining that they're doing. So they're looking for any systems that have obviously lots of CPU resources available to them. That requires at-scale mining for profitability. So again, you're not going to be able to just mine tons of coins with a single system. So you need to expand the amount of systems that are in the pool to be able to do effective coin mining. And that's why we see the cloud as being one of the preferred areas now for these illegitimate actors, the coin mining actor groups, to target, because one, there's lots of instances out there, and they're available to a lot of these groups out there. So why target them? One, cloud migration is growing very rapidly. A lot of organizations are moving to the cloud. And that's a good thing for those organizations because, again, the cloud brings scale, it brings capabilities. You know, you can spin up an instance very quickly, spin it down if you need to. So if you need a lot of processing power at peak times versus unpeak times, cloud instances are very good at doing that kind of processing. Many instances, though, we're finding are deployed for much longer than needed. So, you know, maybe a group inside your organization will spin up a bunch of instances for their project, but then they forget about it. They don't turn those instances off. And so these actor groups find a lot of these instances that are deployed for much longer than they're needed, and they'll take over those to do their cloud mining. One of the things that we saw in our research was a lot of instances that don't even have security installed on them. So obviously, if you go to AWS, you go to Azure, you can just very quickly purchase an AWS instance or Azure instance, spin it up, and unfortunately, you know, the only security that's on there is provided by AWS or the cloud provider. And as hopefully most of us know, that the cloud security it requires both parties to invest in it, right? It's a shared responsibility model. But we're finding a lot of organizations don't add on security to their cloud instances. So these actor groups, that's what they're going to look for. They're going to target any of these, and they're finding lots of them that have no security installed on them, additional security, and they pop up and they'll pop their Cloudminers malware on these very easily, very effectively. We also see a lot of older software versions that are running in these instances, unpatched instances. They're all over the place. So, you know, and again, you'll see in the future here, as I talk about the different groups and what the ways that they access these instances, you see a lot of vulnerabilities, end-day vulnerabilities, which are vulnerabilities that have been already patched, are being found and utilized. And then lastly, the lack of visibility by defenders, because, you know, cloud miners aren't like ransomware. When ransomware drops on a system, it pops up a big old screen that says you've been ransomwared. Whereas this stays under the radar. You don't see a lot of activity other than the resources being taken over, but you don't see a lot of things happening on the system. So there's a lack of awareness or visibility by defenders who are trying to defend against this type of activity. Some of the challenges we have with coin miners, obviously no visual indicator of infection, like I just mentioned. There's not much behavioral indicator of infection. So if you're looking at behavior anomalies, there's probably not going to be seen a lot of that. possible false alarms that can happen because the malware and legitimate apps tend to share the same type of code. So you may not, you may, if you drop something on it, you may get a lot of false alarms. And then but it also opens the door to other malicious activity. And that's one of the things that we see being concerned about is that, even again, it's not doing something necessarily malicious. It's not encrypting the system, the data files. It's not stealing the data files. It's not doing that. All it's doing is piggybacking on the resources to actually mine coins. But obviously, if I can drop a coin miner on the system, I can also drop a backdoor. I can drop a ransomware malware. I can drop a data stealing malware. I can pretty much do anything I want to do on that system. Luckily, a lot of these miner groups are only interested in coin mining. So, and we'll see some evidence of that in the future here. One of the things that we have also noticed that, when people talk about cryptocurrency mining, they probably all think about Bitcoin mining, but in the underground and in the most effective cryptocurrency to mine, in which we see most of them mine, are Monero. XMRig is one of the biggest malwares, cryptocurrency mining malwares that is dropped out there, and that is a Monero miner. And so Monero tends to be the big one that we see out there. Obviously, the price of Monero is much lower than Bitcoin. You can see here it's gone anywhere from $183 per coin to upwards to over 400, but you can see it's pretty fluctuates quite a bit. But in any case, Monero seems to be the best one, especially when it comes to CPU usage. Monero, the algorithm that is used by Monero for CPU usage is pretty good, and it's much easier to do the mining for Monero than it is for Bitcoin. So it tends to be the coin of choice by cryptocurrency miners, especially the illegitimate miners. Now, one of the things that we did as part of an experiment with our researchers did when they looked at this, they wanted to look at the resource consumption of a cloud miner. So we basically created a system, and we dropped XMRig software on it, compromised it with an XMRig. You can see here in the VIRT column, in the red, it went from 2831M to 18.8 gig. You see, so it took over resources quite extensively on this. We noticed the utilization pretty clearly. So, and again, this is one of the things that you can look for, and we'll talk about that later on in the slides here. But wanted to see what the overall impact of this was. And you can see, obviously, in these two charts, the CPU utilization pretty much instantly went to 100%. The credit usage went way up, as you can see on the right-hand one as well. So one of the things that obviously we are seeing here, and one of the ideas is that when these coin miners, these illegitimate malicious actors drop a coin miner on it, they tend to want to take over all the resources, CPU especially, resources of the systems. So that's the one noticeable item that you can obviously look to identify. What we ended up seeing was about a 600% increase in operating costs. So again, if and this is one of the negative aspects of the coin mining that happens to an organization. So again, you may not worry as much about a coin miner dropping because again, it's not necessarily doing actively a malicious activity like ransomware does, or like a data stealing malware might do. But it is going to cost you, and it's going to cost you in resources. For example, if they get on a web server, a server running your website, it may get to the point where your website is not accessible by your customers or your partners. So there is definitely going to be a negative cost associated with it, and why you want to take these seriously and get these things off these systems as quickly as possible. But you can see here the operating cost. So if you're being charged, let's say on average 30% utilization, we saw, for example, if you're doing $100 a month cost of operating cost of that server, all of a sudden now you're looking at $600 a month. So there is definitely a cost associated with this. Now, one of the things we did in our research is we ended up looking at 5 different cloud mining groups. And I'm going to cover each one of these groups with you and look at some of the different ways that they do their attacks. And the way we set this up is we built a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the highest and 1 being the lowest. So for example, with Outlaw here, and one of the Romanian word for haiduc came out of one of their scripts. They used the word haiduc in it. So, and they kind of came from a Romanian background. But Outlaw is a group, and you can see from a longevity perspective, we've been seeing them since 2018. Sophistication, very low. Partly because they tend to focus on IoT, but they have expanded since then to target cloud instances. Vulnerabilities is at a 1, so very low sophistication. They tend to use the exact same vulnerability every single time. And the social presence. So are they on social media? And that was they don't with this group. They don't tend to brag or anything. But you can see here now, on the initial access, vulnerabilities in IoT and Linux servers. And this is where, but when they started adding Linux servers is when they started to look at cloud instances, because a lot of cloud obviously is run by Linux. One of so that's, you can also see they also look at brute force attacks via SSH. So this is where you see the initial access to an organization is going to be mostly around vulnerabilities, the use of vulnerabilities that they find. Again, end-day vulnerabilities. They're not going to be going out and buying a 0-day vulnerability for $500,000 to do cloud mining. They're going to use end-day. And again, as I mentioned earlier, one of the things, commonalities that we see is all these groups tend to use vulnerabilities because they are finding them open on lots and lots of cloud instances. So a lot of organizations, unfortunately, are not patching their cloud instances. And then brute force attacks. So again, weak passwords for accounts. So they want to get onto these systems to be the accounts that are associated with them. And we see lots of still poor account setup as well. What they tend to do once they get on this system in the initial access is they will install an IRC bot malware. And a lot of these groups will utilize IRC bots so that you have to build a pool in order to effectively mine. So which basically is a botnet. So they're going to build up a botnet of cloud instances out there, and they typically use IRC in the communication process. This was a little different from what previously was done, but a lot of them have shifted now to utilizing IRC. And then they'll mine Monero, but Outlaw also will perform DDoS. So again, I mentioned earlier that once I'm on a system and if I'm doing mining, it doesn't mean I can't drop other types of attacks on these systems. So in this case, they tend to drop code to be able to do DDoS attacks. And one of the things we have seen, again, why we don't give them as being very sophisticated, they haven't changed a lot since 2019. So a lot of what we see today is the same thing they've been doing 2-3 years ago. So this group doesn't tend to do a lot. They tend to stick with what works for them. And they do still tend to focus a lot on IoT mining, but they have been shifting a little bit more into that other one. Now, one of the things we saw, they added scripts to uninstall some of the competitors, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about later is the kind of the capture the flag type of phenomenon with these groups. So they tend to compete against each other for the same resources. So again, when they find these resources, they look for they look to see if their competitors are on them, and if they are, they try to uninstall their competitors. They also uninstall previous versions of their own software to try to stay obfuscate their persistence on these systems. They changed their IP address fairly recently for their command and control server. So you can see here they went from, in 2019, 2020, you can see the IP address and then what they changed it to. And that's just the scripts that we're running to make that change for them. Again, I mentioned that no social media accounts that we could find. So they tend to not want to brag about that. So one of the things you'll see in this as we go through this is that there are groups that want to advertise themselves and want to kind of praise themselves on social media. And there's groups that just want to stay under the radar and do their things silently. The second group I wanted to talk about is TeamTNT. We've done a number of articles last year, blog articles on TeamTNT. They were pretty prolific last year, and definitely focused on cloud and cloud instances. We do rank them as middle of the pack in terms of sophistication, but it's been improving they improved themselves quite steadily, which is why you see 5s in the vulnerabilities. It's a 5 in social presence. They were pretty active in social media. Hild and Hildebrand were two of the handles that they used quite extensively, or names that they used quite extensively. Their sophistication is pretty, kind of middle of the pack there, but they were around since 2020. And on the initial access for this group, again, looking at vulnerabilities and victim applications. So they looked for end days and regularly tried to exploit end days. They used credential theft for lateral movement. So once they were able to do the initial access, that's when they started to look for credential theft. They looked to use a number of applications to find accounts, and then they would either brute force, or they would try to do some phishing to be able to get lateral movement via the credential theft side. They definitely focused on AWS and ngrok were the two types of areas that they focused for their credential theft. So they were looking for AWS accounts, they were looking at their ngrok accounts, and they would look to get access to those, the administrators of those applications. You can see here, like I said, the social media presence. They had joined it in 2020 out of Germany. And you can see they definitely targeted Kinsing, which is another group that I'll be talking about here later. But what was interesting in our research of this group is they really considered themselves quite helpful. It was common to find messages left in their scripts and on systems that offer free cleanup services, allegedly to help their victims fix the very issues that they were using to compromise the systems in the first place. You can see here, this was one where they actually infected us, took off this dynamite group. That was another group that was out there. They were able to uninstall their stuff. But if you look on the right, I know it's probably hard to read, but you can see, I'll read some of this to you because it's pretty funny. Again, here's a group that's actively exploiting your organization, crypto mining your resources, using your resources against you to crypto mine. And they said, the goal of this campaign is as follows: keep the internet safe, keep hackers away from your organization, prevent real harm. We know you feel like we are a potential threat. We are not. We want to show that how tiny security problems can lead to complete disasters. We know you feel like we are hypocrites for mining. Well, if we didn't, how else could we make ourselves known? please, we appeal to everyone out there, don't sabotage this campaign. We want to make the internet safer. Sometimes you have to break the rules to make them. And then there are disclaimers. One, we just want to mine. We don't want any data, ransom, or anything else. If you find this code, please don't post about it. We make your security better by breaking it. So, so again, they tried to make themselves out as the heroes in this situation, which is pretty funny to me, but that was kind of how they did things. This is another example calling out Watchdog, which was another cryptocurrency mining group for installing software on the same victims as TeamTNT. So they felt like they were removing other malware out there for you if you were the victim here, and they would just end up just wanting to mine, not do anything destructive. They definitely evolved their infrastructure in 2021. They tended to deploy a number of rootkits on systems. This was the one group that we saw incorporating CPU thresholds. So again, instead of dropping a miner on there and then taking the CPU utilization all the way to 100%, they would throttle it down. So again, if you are actively monitoring your CPU resource usage on your systems, they may stay under that threshold that you would flag about. You can see one thing though, they announced end of operations in November of 2021. They say they have quit. Now, again, we're going to take that with a grain of salt. We're continuing to monitor. They definitely have not been active in social media since then, but we are continuing to monitor our sensors with this group to see if they do come back and they continue to be active. I mentioned Kinsing. So Kinsing is the next one. Again, you can see here since 2020, sophistication is a 4, vulnerability is a 4, social presence 1. So this is another group that wants to stay under the radar. They don't want to advertise themselves or show themselves out there. On the initial access, they actually possess a pool of exploitable vulnerabilities. So it's like a exploit kit, but they'll use a whole bunch of different vulnerabilities that they'll look for on these instances to exploit. They definitely operationalize new vulnerabilities very quickly. So that tends to be another trademark of this group. So whenever there's a new vulnerability disclosed out there that has a POC or has active exploitation associated with it, they're very quick to utilize it. They use XMRig for Monero mining once they get access to the systems. They maintain their persistence with cron jobs. So they'll develop a bunch of cron jobs so that if that instance goes down and a new instance comes up, it'll automatically activate their miner to run again. They do clean up their setup files and their processes. So once they get the mining process going, they tend to remove a lot of their previous activities and instances because they want to stay under the radar so that you can't find some of that older their setup files or their processes. They also are doing this to keep themselves hidden from other actor groups, other mining groups that are out there. We'll talk about that. We saw, in fact, 8220, who I'm going to be talking about here in a bit, they were competing against themselves. These two actor groups were competing for the same resources in a number of cases that we observed. And they were able to remove the 8220 code pretty effectively. No known presence on there. One of the things that Juniper Networks blogged about late last year was that they used Log4j vulnerability very quickly after disclosure. So one of the things, again, I mentioned they tend to use newly disclosed vulnerabilities. Log4j was one of them that Juniper saw this group starting to use very quickly in compromising instances out there. We do believe that this group is one of the more active ones and that their sophistication is growing and they're going to be ramping up their attacks in the future. I mentioned the fighting for resources between them and 8220. You can see here, this is a typical day where Kinsing was on the system, and then 8220 tried to jump on the system and knocked them off, and then Kinsing killed them and got back on the system, and vice versa. So they were competing, and this is just a single day. So you can see here they're fighting for the resources and fighting each other. Kinsing ultimately was able to take it over, and they were able to compromise the host 7 times in a few days. With the longest ever kept presence within the system was only about 13 minutes. So they were able to get their miner on there and mine for about 13 minutes before Kinsing killed them and kept mining their own stuff. So this is, we'll talk a little bit, and I have a whole section on this, but thought I'd share that. 8220 here. So again, been around for quite a long time, 2017. Sophistication only a 2, vulnerabilities a 3, and social presence a 1. On the initial access, they tend to utilize Oracle WebLogic servers, so vulnerabilities that target Oracle WebLogic. So those were the systems that they were trying to target a lot. Their toolkit that they install using, again, XMRig, like I mentioned, that's pretty much everyone uses XMRig. But they also use Tsunami, which is a DDoS scanning platform. And they also had a shell script that sets up cron jobs for persistence. So they actually have their own toolkit that they regularly utilize and they update on occasion. I mentioned that they and Kinsing tend to fight. Their script looks for other competitors, so they'll look for Outlaw, they'll look for others out there as well. Very little social media presence. Now, the last one I wanted to highlight was Kek Security. So they're fairly new. We started looking at them in 2021. Sophistication of 4, vulnerabilities of 4, social presence of 3. So this is one group that tends to be more prolific on social media. In the initial access, you can see they utilize a whole slew of vulnerabilities, mostly from 2020 and 2021. But you can see, again, Oracle WebLogic, TerraMaster, Zend, LifeRay, VMware vCenter, Genexus platform. Recently, they were using Eternal Blue and Eternal Romance, which have been around for many, many years. We also, they built some more obfuscation into their malware recently. Their infrastructure is mostly on Tor. So again, trying to stay under the radar. A very minor presence, but they definitely are on social media. They use an IRC botnet for their mining process. And you can see in this Python script that they ran, they have a name listed, and the author is Freak, which might be the nickname for the author there that they utilized. But again, IRC botnets and so forth. So Kek Security, again, they're fairly sophisticated, and we're expecting them to continue to be seen out there and probably grow their presence in the mining community. Here's some of the activity that we saw among all the different groups. So you can see here, again, even though TeamTNT was very active in social media, we blogged about them a lot. They actually weren't very big on the cloud mining side of the house. They did other things that they targeted inside organizations with their cloud infrastructure. So they were one of the ones that, besides cloud mining, they did a lot of other types of malicious activity associated with their victims. But you can see here, so for example, Kinsing was probably the one that was the most steady, along with 8220. But you can see some spikes in here by 8220. That was when they introduced some of the use of new vulnerabilities that had been discovered. So you can see all of a sudden they had spikes because they added a new vulnerability that was newly disclosed, and obviously with lots of organizations struggling to patch quickly, they were able to add a whole bunch of new miners on systems that hadn't been patched yet. So you can see those little spikes that happen. Here's some more, if you look at on a month-to-month basis, probably gives you a little better idea who is the bigger group out there. So again, 8220 and Kinsing tend to be the two biggest ones that we see out there. Outlaw, one of the things with Outlaw, it's interesting, I mentioned they compete for resources. Outlaw is the one group that tends to not try to compete. They try to target other instances out there. So they're not looking for instances predominantly that are their competitors, so to speak. They try to find new systems that no one else is on and utilize those systems. But the other ones, the other groups, we do see a lot of competitiveness and a lot of trying to take over the same instances out there. All right, let's talk about defense strategies. So, we talk about, obviously this is happening out there. There's a lot of activity with these groups. Cloud mining is a phenomenon we're going to continue to see. We think we're going to see pretty good size growth in this area in 2022. But when we look at recommendations, there's really two types I'm going to talk about. Defense and best practices against all types of cloud attacks. So what can you do to harden up your cloud infrastructure in and of itself? So not just against cloud mining, because as I said earlier, if I can get on with a cloud miner, I can get on with other things. The other area I forgot to mention, and I did want to mention this, is one of the things that we have been seeing. You may be familiar with access as a service brokers or initial access brokers. These are groups that they're predominantly expertise in getting access to organizations' network infrastructure. And many of them are getting into cloud, getting this way through cloud infrastructure. And one of the things that phenomena we're starting to see with these access brokers is during the time when they aren't selling access to others, or maybe they're advertising that access and they haven't got a customer yet of theirs, they drop cloud miners. So because they want to make money all the time. So we're seeing those groups versus the outlaws and the Kinsings, who are predominantly they're focused on cloud mining. These access as a service brokers, well, obviously their main focus is to sell access, and they get a lot of money to sell access to ransomware gangs or APT groups. But in the meantime, while they have a lot of access to a lot of organizations, let's drop cloud miners on these on some of the systems that we have and build up a pool and do some mining, because I can make money doing that. But the second area is hardened systems against actually specifically to cloud mining we'll talk about. So some of the first best practices in defense: ensure your systems, OS applications are up to date. Across the entire stack. So this also includes Kubernetes, Docker deployments, because they're going to target those as well, besides just typical instances, AWS instances, Azure instances, Google instances, whatever it might be. But again, the predominant way to get into these systems, initial access, is going to be through exploits of end-day vulnerabilities. So organizations should definitely look at ways to improve the patching process for their cloud instances. You also may want to invest in IPS technology. So there is capability where you can put a virtual patch on these instances. So anytime a new instance spins up, it has a virtual patch associated with some of these vulnerabilities that are being there, if you don't have the ability to build the full patch into the instance. Harden up your APIs and do not expose APIs to the internet. Do not expose, if you can, your cloud. A lot of cloud instances are exposed to the internet. A lot of times this is through misconfiguration. So they definitely look, one of the reasons why they are looking at cloud is because they know that a lot of organizations are new to the cloud infrastructure. They may not realize how to harden up cloud instances. They may not realize, they may misconfigure their APIs or misconfigure their cloud instances and open it up to the internet. So harden those up. TeamTNT was well known to be exploiting APIs and targeting APIs. Also understand your baselines for your applications, normal levels of CPU usage, expected external connections, add alerts when you exceed those thresholds. You know, when you have a cloud instances, you know, do you have to have all the ports open, all the services open? Minimize those. Look at your look at the accounts that are on these systems and harden up those accounts for sure. You want to look at that as well. Now on cloud mining, there's a couple of things. Rules that monitor the utilization of resources from a cost perspective. So with overutilization. So cryptocurrency mining attacks lead to spikes in CPU usage. It may lead to spikes in your how much you're paying out every month in resources and the infrastructure. Billing dependencies can be flagged as well. So you want to take a look at that capability. Monitor additional open ports that are beyond the need of the specific cloud service in operation, especially those running on privileged ports. So you want to monitor those or turn them off altogether if they aren't needed. Usage and changes made to DNS routing, which is a common avenue of setting up clusters for cryptocurrency mining. So again, when they build up pools, a lot of times there may be changes to your DNS routing because they're building up that botnet of pools of cloud miners. So you might want to take a look at that as well. And then we definitely recommend reviewing the best practice guides by the cloud providers. They have very good information in those practice guides, best practice guides on hardening up their infrastructure and their component. But again, this is a shared responsibility model. So there's lots of things that you have to do as you're building a cloud infrastructure yourself. One of the things we can offer, obviously, our Tremeka One unified cybersecurity platform does have the Cloud One platform. Our Cloud One platform offers many capabilities that can help in this area, specifically not just for cloud mining detection, but also hardening up your cloud infrastructure. It can help you with that. It can definitely help you with vulnerability management through virtual patching and some other capabilities that we have built into that. So love to talk to you about that. If you're not familiar with us, we've been around for many years. We're almost nearly 2 billion in revenue, been profitable since going public in 1998 every quarter. We have 500,000 commercial customers around the world. Many of those are utilizing cloud infrastructure and utilizing our Cloud One platform to protect themselves. So we would love to talk to you. If you want to contact us, we'd love it. I'm going to open it up to questions now. I don't see any open questions in the Q&A, but let me check the chat to see if there's anything in there. Yeah, I don't see any actual questions at this point. So I'm going to shut this down, but I want to thank you all for attending today. As I mentioned before, we will be sending you a link to the recorded webinar, so it'll be on demand shortly here, as well as a copy of the slides for if you wanted to share those as well. So I will let you all go. I just want a heads up. I am not going to be doing a webinar in April. We have some other items and I'm going to be on some PTO at the end of the month. So I will be back in May to cover a new topic. So next month, just follow our blog, follow our other content that we have out there on a regular basis, and I'll look to see you again in May. So everybody have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.